Good afternoon, everyone. This is Republic of Letters, Groundbreak 2020. Currently, the first session is underway, a keynote address on track one, on the topic of the Digital University by Dr. Shubhra Suresh, President, Nanyang Technological University, Singapore. The session is being moderated by Viti Bharatwaj, founder and trustee, Ashoka University. In case you're interested in attending this session, please click on the link that is being shared on the chat. This link will take you to link track one, where the keynote address is currently happening. We will begin the first session under track two at around 4:30. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Our keynote is running a little late, so we'll begin shortly. Welcome back. For all of you who are joining us from the keynote, we hope it was a great session. And for everyone else, welcome to track 2, the Resilient Institution. Here, our speakers will address the main administrative and governance related questions that have been plaguing our higher education leaders ever since the COVID-19 pandemic hit us. Before we begin the panel discussion, I'd like to inform you about the parallel sessions that are happening right now. We have a session on track 1, which is the track on transitioning to digital, which talks about pedagogy, past, present, and future. In case you're interested in attending this session, please click on the link that has been provided to you in the chat box right now for track 1. We also have an exclusive invite-only session that's happening on track 3, which is on leading from the front. This session is on leadership for sustained excellence. In case you're interested in attending this session, again, please click on the link that is being provided in the chat box for track 3. You may be required to put in a password. This has been shared with you over emails and WhatsApp in case you have received an invite. On that note, let me quickly move into the session today. Okay, so our first session under track 2 is a panel discussion on how institutions are responding to the pandemic everywhere. This is a global perspective. This session is being chaired by Dr. Furkan Kamer. Dr. Kamer is a professor at the Center for Management Studies at Jamia Millia Islamia. He has previously worked as the Secretary General of the Association of Indian Universities. He has also been the Vice Chancellor for University of Rajasthan, Central University of Himachal Pradesh, and he has also been an advisor for education to the Planning Commission of India. Dr. Kamer, over to you.
Thank you, Sanjay, for starting the session. I must compliment Ashoka University and Harappa Education for organizing this 3-day event, and characteristic to Pramath, this event has been organized at such a mega scale, a 3-day event with 3 parallel sessions with host of keynote addresses. So congratulations to you, Pramath. I would also like to thank all the panelists who are joining in this panel. I can't see them, but I can see their names written there, so I know that they are present there. So let me just wave my hand to say thank you to each one of them. This COVID-19 that has become the reason for us to rethink and reimagine higher education from afresh has indeed provided us an opportunity, but presently we are also living in a very challenging time. Some may call it as an unprecedented catastrophe, but the history tells us that no, we have been here before. We know that from 14th century to 17th century, the Europe suffered from what we call as Black Death and Plague pandemic. A century ago, we had the Spanish flu, maybe wrongly to call it so. Not surprisingly, in India, the Ministry of Human Resource Development and also the University Grants Commission wanted universities to go back into their archives to find out that how did the university face the 1918 catastrophe at the time. That was a huge catastrophe because by one estimate, almost 50 million people died, out of which 18 millions were Indian. Although at that time we had very small number of universities, about 8 universities and about 220 colleges, so far none has come out as to how did they cope with, but I'm sure that people would be working with us. I quickly scanned through some literature that are already available on web and in published form. And 2-3 things emerge out very clearly. Number one, that our response to COVID-19 as far as higher education and the other economy is concerned is by and large the same as it was in 1918, about a century ago. In the same way, the campuses was closed, students left the campuses, went elsewhere, and so on and so forth. Maybe they did not use the term social distancing, but they were prohibited to dance, they were prohibited to sit together. Classes were held in open, so by and large, quite a large similarities. The second thing that we find is that crises always create their own opportunities. They throw up alternatives. So in 14th to 17th centuries, people will leave their campuses and would go to country house, countryside manors. They would become kind of scholars in residence. But then it is also very clear that these alternatives did not remain as viable alternatives, and universities, the way they are, they bounced back in their usual forms and shapes as soon as the first opportunity arose. It is also becoming clear that there were people who made the best out of the crisis. For example, most of the work that Newton did was that when he left Cambridge for 2 years to stay at his home, it's considered to be the best of his and the most of his productive time. But then these anecdotal evidences cannot be generalized. Can we therefore conclude that the future after COVID would become once again the same or similar as to what we are? I think there are some indications that things might be different. First of all, as in the keynote that just concluded was very elaborately mentioned by Professor Subra Suresh, that the technology, the advancement in the technology, the affordability of the technology, access to the technology, and the versatility of the technology. Not only that, the whole commerce that is backing the technology would play a very major role. So I'll not be surprised that if to a large extent online digital remote learning would continue to remain even after the COVID crisis over. But what also gives us a hope and makes things different than a century ago is the kind of response at the global level that various institutions and individual institutions showed up, and the speed and the extent with which the knowledge were gathered, experience was shared, resources were put together. Just to cite a few, for example, the UNESCO by 20th April had come up with the preliminary estimates of as to what universities across the world are doing and what kind of difficulties teachers and students are facing, to throw some lights about the challenges of learning. UNESCO also came up with the impact analysis and the policy response. UNESCO also came up with a policy document suggesting as to what do we do in the post-COVID scenario. The World Bank came up with a series of documents to support tertiary education. How can they continue? How can they adapt? What kind of innovation would take place? And not only that, the World Bank also put together all the resources that different institutions and universities and countries across the world used to promote, to continue higher education in the form of remote learning. So a global resource list was available to us. Universities associations played a very important role. For example, International Association of Universities, ACU, Universities UK, they negotiated on behalf of the higher educational institutions, and to a large extent, they have also been quite successful in prevailing upon their national governments and the global community to include higher education and the universities as part of the stimulus package. So it is in this background that this panel was organized, and I'm so grateful that 4 very eminent panelists agreed to be on the panel, out of which 3 are present. I do not know in which order I should invite you, so easier for me is to invite you by the order of your first name. So the first person in my list is Francisco Marmolejo, an international educational administrator, presently education advisor, Qatar Foundation for Education, Health, and Community Development, served as global coordinator of tertiary education and also lead tertiary education specialist of the World Bank. And for 3 or 4 years, he was in Delhi, and that was the time which I very fondly remember and which I miss, even though I am seeing him face to face in person. I'll always miss him. I hardly see these days a webinar, be it on the impact of COVID or internationalization or policy reforms in higher education, where Francisco Marmolejo is not a key speaker or the chair of the session. So thank you, Francisco, for being here. Then, as I mentioned, that Universities Association played a very important role. And we have Joanna Newman, who is Chief Executive Officer and Secretary General of the Association of Commonwealth Universities, a historian by training. She has taught at University College London and Warwick. She describes herself also as a journalist, besides being an academics and administrator. Earlier served as Vice Principal at King's College London and Director International Universities UK, the position which I think Vivian holds now. And in her present capacity, she has an in-depth and a very wide view of higher education across all Commonwealth countries, across Africa, Australia, Asia, Europe. And I'm very sure that she can enlighten us not only with the global perspective, but given her discipline, also maybe a historical perspective as well. Indeed, ACU was established in 1913, and 5 years immediately after, some of the member universities of ACU had to face the most troubled time of their time. Peter Wells from UNESCO could not join. I was hoping that he would join, but once you are working in the international, multinational organizations, you have your own compulsions. So Peter just communicated his regret not to be with us. And therefore, we then have Vivian Stern, an alumna of University of Cambridge. Vivian is presently director of Universities UK International, which represents UK universities around the world and works to enable them to flourish internationally. Vivian has vast experience of working in higher education policy and politics at national and international level. Prior to her present role, Vivian was head of political affairs at Universities UK and led the sector's response to several major pieces of legislations relating to universities. Before that, she worked for the chair of the House of Common Education Select Committee and as policy specialist working on topics including quality, student experience, innovation, and university business link. Welcome you all, and thank you very much for sparing your valuable time for this event. As communicated earlier, maybe each one of us have about 10 minutes of time and maybe a little more, and then we will leave the rest of the time to take question and answer. I'm told that this conference is attended by more than 2,000 participants, but then they are now split over 3 parallel sessions. So may I invite Francisco Marmolejo to kickstart the discussion.
Thank you very much, Dr. Furkan. It's a real pleasure seeing you and connecting with you. And of course, also connecting with Joanna and Vivian as we discuss this very important topic. I miss my time in India, I should say, and participating at this event is a good reminder of the good time that I had when I was in India. Now, 5 months ago when I moved out of India, I never imagined that the world will experience what it is experiencing. It was a completely different world. Of course, the shadow of the pandemic was, arriving, if you want. Some institutions were a little bit concerned, but at that time, there was not one single country that have decided yet to close any of their universities. Amazingly, in just 3 months after, literally the entire higher education system in the world, was shut down. More than 200 million students in the world couldn't continue their education on the traditional way. Teachers also were unable to go to the institution. So what it was, the unimaginable, it already happened. Universities already had to stop operating on the traditional way that they have been doing for many years. At least during our time life, this is the only case, the only situation in which something like that had happened. Now, in terms of the consequences and of course the potential implications that it has for the future, well, the first thing that I like to say is that, of course, all those who think that, the new normal will be like, back to business as usual, it may happen. I don't think that is going to be the case. I'm sure that, the significant implications of this crisis have been teaching us in higher education that we can no longer think that the day-to-day life of institutions in the future is going to be like it used to be. There is nothing new to say about that. But just to be more specific about the challenges ahead, I think the first challenge that all institutions should have at this point addressing is how to minimize the student learning deficit that is happening due to the transition online. Many institutions, a great majority of institutions in the world, were able some way to transition to remote teaching. And I insist on the word remote, which is not virtual, because it basically was a transition on the means being used to, in most of the cases, continue doing the same as they were doing. Teaching the typical lecture and students listening to the typical lecture. So that is not virtual education, it's just remote education. So, and in that scenario, a significant number of students globally have not been able to have access to technology that would allow them to continue. About 40% of students globally are not having the opportunity to continue their education, even through the technological means that are being used in a number of institutions today. The divide is very, very very huge. For instance, in the case of India, the divide between the urban and rural India in terms of access to the internet is quite significant. So assuming that students in rural areas are going to be able to continue their education, it will be an illusion. The second thing is how to reduce the inequality due to the technological divide. That inequality in access of opportunities is a challenge that it happens right now, but also it will have significant ramifications in the future. The third one is how to keep students and teachers engaged, motivated, and in good mental health. The fourth one, in a very short term, is how to guarantee the integrity of the testing and the learning assessment. And then finally, how to mitigate the academic impact that all higher education institutions in the world will have due to the upcoming financial constraints that, we like it or not, the entire world is going to be dealing with. So those are very short-term sort of implications that I think we need to be extremely mindful of as we are thinking about what are going to be what is going to be the new scenario. Now, the other thing that I'd like to mention, is that many of the challenges that higher education will face after the pandemic were challenges that existed before. And the only difference today is that they are excessively magnified because of the crisis. And of course, it will be much more acute after the COVID crisis, whenever we consider that we were out of that crisis. What are those challenges? The challenge of equitable access to higher education, relevance in higher education, governance in higher education, of course, financing of higher education are among the challenges that existed before that were not yet properly addressed and that consequently will have to be taken in consideration in a completely different scenario. Now, what I see also is, in one way, we are in a very difficult situation. We know that the situation is going to be very complicated in the future, but at the same time, it's a unique momentum. It is a unique opportunity to envision together about areas of work in which we can make higher education better. We can, for instance, try, and we already learned because of the crisis, that we can use technology to increase access to higher education to others that otherwise might not be able to have access to. I can tell you the case, for instance, of the National University of Colombia right now, which is considering that since they are unable this year to have the admission examination, then they are saying, okay, we won't have entrance examination this year. We will have kind of a semester zero where we will provide general education to students, and those students that are going to be able to pass that initial zero semester, if you want, then there are the ones that are going to be accepted. So this is just one example of the many that exist today in which creativity of institutions is allowing them to cope with the crisis and also to cope with the new normal. Now, some final things that I like to mention is that, based on the report that the Qatar Foundation commissioned to the Economist Intelligence Unit, we think about 5 different challenges ahead. The first one is how to contribute to an increasingly digital economy and society. Secondly is how do we leverage technology to deliver better education? And again, this is more or less what I was referring to before. Third, how do we respond to a growing demand by shifting demographics that the world will experience in higher education? Fourth is how do we strike the balance between public and private education by assuring that both provide good quality of education and good relevance of education? The fifth one is how do we remain in higher education both global but at the same time in an age in which there will be, we like it or not, increased nationalism, increased conservatism in societies. And then a sixth one that it is related to all of them is, how do we make our higher education institutions more flexible, more kind of less risk averse, more collaborative, and more willing to challenge some of the traditional dogmas that we used to have in higher education and that we had taken for granted, and of course that we don't think as of today that can change. I think we can challenge ourselves and then to consider that in a new future, many of those assumptions under which we build higher education should be challenged and should be questioned in order to rebuild a better education. I might say, just to finish, that the crisis is telling us that we have an opportunity to remake higher education, not to repair, but to remake higher education. And of course, it is going to be up to us if we redesign that higher education in a more responsive way to the needs that society will have in a future that nobody can predict how it will be, but that everybody can assure that it will be different as of today.
Thank you, Francisco. Every word that you said is extremely important, but thank you for the assurance that the universities would survive. They would continue to exist. But I think this point that you are making, I think everybody been talking about comorbidity along with COVID, but I think this pre-morbidity issue that you raised, that the problem existed, the challenges existed, the crisis has only exacerbated them. I think these are all issues that we will be deliberating further. Thank you very much. With these, may I now invite Dr. Joanna Newman to please make her presentation. We are leaving the question answer sessions to the end.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and I'm very grateful to Ashoka University and Harappa Education for inviting the Association of Commonwealth Universities to take part, and I'm very glad to be on a panel with many good friends. I wanted to start, I'm going to share my screen, and I'm hoping that you will all be able to see it. Just to start by saying that I think the world faces three existential and interlinked crises at the moment, obviously COVID-19, but also, as Francisco has just been reminding us, inequality and climate change. And universities, as thought leaders and innovators, have been at the forefront of the fight against the pandemic and must continue to lead efforts to tackle global issues. And the interesting thing is that universities since 2015, or higher education, has been part of the Sustainable Development Goals, which replaced the Millennium Goals. So there is a recognition of the incredible importance of universities, as Furkan just alluded to. Yes, they will continue and they must, because the amount of people, young people, particularly in the Commonwealth, 60% under 30, many in India, who need to access some form of higher education. Unfortunately, the levels of quality and access to that really good higher education is very, very limited. And that's one of the issues that the ACU is particularly interested in tackling. And it's also, I suppose, one of the issues which has really been highlighted recently in this pandemic. Of course, if Peter Wells was on, he would also be probably saying something similar to me, in that it's really important for university associations to press the cause of higher education at UN levels and discussions. And the Association of Commonwealth Universities has been working with the Association of Universities Francophonie and the International Association of Universities. So together we're 2,000 universities, and contributing to the high-level policy forums at the UN to press the case for why higher education is not only needed for its own sake, but without higher education and a healthy education system in a country, none of the 17 goals could possibly be reached. If you want good quality primary education, if you want good pedagogy, if you want good teacher training, if you need cutting edge research, but also applied research, you need universities. You also need graduates who have gone through a balanced education to turn them into citizens who can reason, who can think for themselves, and who where a a context of tolerance and understanding is created. Again, to Francisco's point about increasing borders, borders and increasing intolerance in this world, universities have a really important role to play there, excuse me. So the good news is that universities have really rallied during COVID, and there's some fantastic examples here of what universities are doing. The top left image is from Kenyatta University in Kenya, where 15 of their medical and engineering students have recently made history by making the country's first homegrown prototype ventilator to help treat patients severely affected by the virus. And we had a conversation recently with our regional committee. Zambia don't have any ventilators. So there's going to be a new collaboration between Kenyatta and a university in Zambia to help to try to produce the technology in Zambia. The bottom left image is students working in a 3D printing lab at Stellenbosch University in South Africa, where they're producing visors to protect healthcare workers. And these are being distributed as protective gear for people working on the front line. And it's just one of many examples of universities donating vital medical and protective equipment to the health services. The top right, the University of Asia Pacific, faculty members making a hand sanitizer.
Joanna, just a second, perhaps we can't see your screen, or is it only me? I'm also seeing some other people saying that they can't see the screen.
Oh, that's a problem.
Could you help?
Yeah, the screen is not visible.
Okay, let me just hang on a second, please. Apologies. Let me just go back. Is it now visible?
No.
Now it's visible. Thank you.
Apologies. Apologies for that. I thought apologies. I'm not going to repeat what I said, but this is just about the ACU, who we are. This is the points I was making about the Sustainable Development Goals. All 17 are there that you can see. And these are the images. So the top left is Kenyatta students working on a ventilator. The bottom left are at Stellenbosch. The top right is the University of the Asia Pacific, where students are making a hand sanitizer. And the bottom right is the University of Cape Town, manning a COVID-19 hotline. And I suppose the points I want to make here is that universities have been extraordinarily innovative. And also in certain contexts, there has been many questions about the role of higher education and questions about the elitism of universities. And I think during the last few months, if nothing else, universities have demonstrated the integral role that they play. And I think that post-COVID, the discussions about development in higher education will be easier to make than they possibly were before COVID happened. We've also had, of course, many issues, and the ACU's been running a series of webinars which have talked about how to assess students online, for example, what has been learnt and what will be kept as good practice and what will people be happy to return back to the real space again for. Coventry, for example, moved 24,000 assessments online in 3 weeks. And a university in Ghana, Knust Kwame Nkrumah University, worked with students to help them learn how to do virtual learning. So there are really good examples of innovation. But at the same time, I think COVID has also exposed the huge inequalities that are in our society. Universities have a responsibility to consider their role in making societies more equal through access, for example, to higher education. But there has been a huge digital divide that has been exposed. So not only the Black Lives Matter after the appalling murder of George Floyd, but also the inequalities in access to education have been exposed really harshly. The ACU's just done a survey. We've just got the results, which I wanted to share with you. We surveyed our members on their experiences and perceptions of digital engagement, and we had about 266 responses from 33 countries. And some of the key findings and its initial findings include that just over half said that their institution had fully closed, with 41% stating that their university had implemented a partial closure. Some 2/3 identified both internet speed and data costs as key problems, and a third indicated that their university had provided them with devices and was making a contribution. Nearly half of respondents reported that download speeds were really slow. And over half reported also that they didn't feel a degree earned solely through online learning was equivalent to a degree provided in a blended format, which is something I think we could also discuss, because the ACU has been doing a lot of work pre-COVID on blended learning and has been talking to our Indian institutions about a new program where we would be co-creating content, really good quality content that could be shared amongst universities, which relieves the pressure on lecturers and allows more students access to good quality education and lecturers to be trained in different forms of blended provision. So that's just the survey so far, and what the ACU wants to do with this, with these results, is work with our sister organisations AIU and AUF to press the case at UN but also Commonwealth government level about what governments can do with the private sector and with universities to ensure that students and universities are equipped with data and access and laptops, because this will not be the only time we want to work remotely. And as we know, collaboration remotely works really well if people have access to it. But there is now a digital divide that has been exposed by COVID, as well as all the other inequalities that we already know about. So what's the ACU doing about it? Just in brief, we've translated all of our grants from physical grants for mobility to virtual grants. We're doing a summer school with Ghana this year on migration and refugees. And instead of, we've worked with some educational technologists to make it a cultural experience as well as a learning experience. So there'll be time out, there'll be time where we're trying to experiment with different ways of social mixing. We hope it will be a really valuable experience in its own right, even though it's not in the physical space. We also have networks like the Peace and Reconciliation Network and also the Climate and Resilience Network. And today we're also launching a new Commonwealth Sustainable Urbanisation Forum, which colleagues of mine are doing right now, which is looking at how the projected increase in the world's urban population by 2050 is forecast to take place in most Commonwealth countries. And again, Commonwealth universities need to be supporting the planning, the urban planning, the architecture, the social sciences that help to make our lives healthy in increasing urbanisation and city lives. I'm going to end here just by showing you a slide which is from Elsevier, and it just shows the various different research collaborations across the world to help find COVID solutions. And it really, for me, demonstrates that international collaboration is essential and underpins any kind of work going forward. And international collaboration during COVID in some ways has shown the strength of that collaboration, but it also shows how global solutions and internationalization will need to be embedded in everything that we do from now on if we're going to address wider intersecting issues, for example, climate change and inequality and the most disadvantaged. And these international research collaborations, which involve universities across the world, including, for example, Ashoka, who are hosting this conference today, how vital they are. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joanna, for enlightening us about the kind of work that the member universities are doing across almost 50 countries in the world. But I think this issue which Francisco raised about digital divide, I think it also came in your presentation, that your survey also reveals that students and faculty may have difficulties in accessing, and that might be exacerbating the inequalities. I think one issue that we would like to discuss, hope the time would permit, and somebody would ask this question, that what is the kind of trend that you are seeing? Are universities becoming more autonomous or more controlled? Because this is also a kind of challenge which academic fraternity is facing. But before we come to question and answer, let me invite Vivian Stern. Vivian, I have lately been following some of your tweets, and I think you have won your argument of protecting internationalization of higher education. You have been able to prevail on your government to continue to extend certain benefits which full-time regular student would get, even if they are studying online. It's a huge success. So, Vivian, it's your turn. But I think let us hope that this corona would be over soon and we shall all meet once again in person. I miss you all. So, Vivian.
Thank you very much indeed. And it's a pleasure to be with you virtually, although I have to agree with you. The thing that I miss about physical conference attendance is the opportunity to have little conversations in the margins of conferences, to catch up with people, to find out what's going on in an informal way. And I can't wait for us to be able to do that again. But I appreciate this platform nonetheless to have a discussion. And it's great to see Joanna and Francisco, who I esteem highly. I thought perhaps the most useful thing to do would be to sort of give a high-level overview of how the COVID-19 crisis has affected our universities, to talk about what we've been doing as an association, and then I think picking up on some of the areas of concern opened up by both Francisco and Joanna. What might this mean for us in the future? I think, though, to start with a point that Furkan made, universities are resilient. They are resilient institutions. And in the UK context, of course, we have universities that have survived. I hesitate to say this as we're in the teeth of the pandemic, but crises worse than this. And it is obvious to me that although this pandemic will have some quite significant effects on universities right across the world, including some of which may be positive, some of which be perhaps less positive, at least for certain individual institutions. On the other side of this crisis, there are universities who will fundamentally continue to pursue exactly the missions that they were founded to pursue. And I think it's worth holding on to that. But it's also worth holding on to that sort of thing that, well, I found myself saying a lot during the period when we were discussing Brexit endlessly in the UK, that you should always crisis. Crises give you an opportunity to do things that you thought were impossible. And I would propose that each of us in our professional lives have realized that. There were things that I remember sitting around and saying to my colleagues, I simply didn't think were possible, that have turned out to be possible. And I think that's that is quite an inspiring thing to take from this crisis. For our universities, as universities right across the world, the crisis hit faster, I think, than we imagined. I remember sitting in mid-January talking about COVID-19 and its effects in China, beginning to anticipate the knock-on effect it would have on UK universities, little imagining that 6 weeks later we would be in a world in which our universities were shifting all of their provision online, thinking about how they ran a university, continue to facilitate research and education and all of the pastoral support which universities provide to their students and staff, without being able to use the facilities which they thought were essential. It happened so fast. And yet there was a period for us in the UK, at least, when we could see the wave approaching, and we had the advantage of watching how other systems were beginning to respond to requirements to suspend face-to-face teaching, to enter some form or other of lockdown. So we could see a little bit how other university systems had adapted. I think one thing that I keep having to remind colleagues both in the sort of political sphere and outside the university sector is, in the UK at least, universities never close. They're not closed now, they're never shut down. There is a fantastic article on the subject by the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Glasgow, who describes all of the things that universities in the UK have continued to do throughout this whole period, albeit in different ways. And I think it's been phenomenal to see the way that universities continued to to keep the world, the wheels on the bus turning through ingenuity, through tremendous hard work at every level. And I've heard stories, of course, there are vice chancellors who are working 20-hour days, but equally, people right throughout the hierarchy within universities in every professional discipline, professional as well as academic staff, pulling out the stops to find ways to deal with the constraints that are placed upon them. And of course, for us, there has throughout this period, there have been populations of students still on campus. Many universities are still accommodating both domestic and international students at various points. They have been required to make sure those people have access to food, their buildings are being maintained securely. And of course, there are some research facilities that it is impossible to mothball. And so keeping those activities going safely has been a priority. But alongside that, and I think Joanna touched on this, universities in the UK, as I believe in many countries, have asked themselves what they can do to contribute to the national effort. And actually, if you're interested in this, we've got a collection of case studies on the Universities UK website that details how universities right across the UK have stepped up to do things right the way from providing testing facilities, COVID-19 testing facilities, to switching capacity to enable them to manufacture personal protective equipment, to providing accommodation for homeless people, to turning over facilities. In the case, for example, of the University of the West of England, turning over facilities to become temporary hospitals, one of our so-called Nightingale hospitals, which are designed to cope with excess demand for critical care. And that also points to something which I believe, not having studied the literature, is typical of crises, that in a crisis period, individuals can do much more than you would ever imagine they could do. The issue for us now is that as this begins to move into what I would describe as a sort of second phase, there are a lot of people in UK universities, I'm sure this is true across the world, who are basically exhausted. They've been pulling out all the stops, they've been creative, they've been agile, they've stepped up, they've tried to find workarounds for the problems that they're faced with, and they're tired. And I think that also is something that we have to take seriously as university leadership. What about us? So Universities UK is an association. Our members are the universities of the UK. Nearly all UK universities are members of our association. And we've got a series of work streams relating to various aspects of the crisis as it affects universities. And broadly speaking, our work has been divided into three categories. Lobbying, as Furkan said, it's our job to make sure government knows what it needs to do to help the university sector in the UK, and where possible to achieve the policy measures that will help universities ride out this period and come out at the other side stronger institutions. The second role that we've been playing is coordination, so trying to work out where universities, each addressing the same set of problems, might be able to work together to help each other. And that has been, in some respects, quite an uplifting exercise. And the third is providing practical support in the form of guidance or, central repositories or activities that we conduct at a national level, which help universities to do what they need to do at a local level. So one example of that, for example, right now, is that we're working to provide guidance for universities to help them manage the requirement for self-isolation for inbound travellers to the UK, which is currently in place. We don't know how long it will be in place. But rather than every university having to work out how to do that for themselves, we have brought together a group of universities to help us articulate some guidance that everybody can use. We've got, at the last count, 9 work streams. They include dedicated work streams on topics like university admissions, trying to work out how the admissions system will articulate with delays to the examination system, both in the UK and internationally. We have a very highly developed programme of work around welfare, particularly mental health of students during this period. Obviously, there is a lot of work going on financial sustainability, trying to understand the likely impact on individual institutions of this crisis, and to seek support from government to help them mitigate that. And we've been working very closely with regulators, because the legislative environment, the regulatory environment, was designed for one set of circumstances. We've had to work with regulators to make sure that the student interest can continue to be protected appropriately in a way that recognises the manner in which universities have had to be agile in their response to the crisis. We have, I think, entered, as I say, a second phase in which many of the challenges and problems identified have begun to be sort of well understood, that universities have operationalized plans to adapt to circumstances. We've got many universities now coming forward and publishing detailed descriptions of how they will return to face-to-face teaching this autumn, and how they will manage the requirements to maintain social distance on campus and keep both staff and students safe. So although we're not by any means coming back to a period of normality, it isn't going to be normal this academic year. I think we're beginning to move into a phase in which we're going to try to revive some of the things that have been missing in the last few months. But of course, it's also becoming clear in many aspects of university life what really is going to have to change. I think it's incredibly important to pick up on the point that I think Francisco made articulately. The digital divide exists in the UK too, and it is a function of poverty. It is also absolutely abundantly clear that the experience of children in our schools varies enormously. Some schools have pulled out all of the stops and made sure that children really can progress academically. Some parents have been able to support their children to engage with that, others have not. And in the autumn, I think it will begin to be clear just how considerable the difference between some students and others will be. And at some point, that is going to be the business of universities, as they help, as Francisco described, students to recover the position that they might have been in academic terms if it hadn't been for this experience. But making sure that doesn't feed into a long-term set of conditions which exacerbate social inequality in the UK will be all of our business. The other aspect of this new normal, which I think deserves attention, is the short-term and medium-term effects on economic conditions. We will be taking graduates into universities on the promise that a university education will equip them for a successful career. But we know that if you enter into a labour market in which there are fewer opportunities and you are unemployed for a significant period of time, that has a lasting effect on your career. So right now we have to be thinking about ways to mitigate the impact of a very difficult labour market on graduates over the next sort of 3 to 5 year period, and coming up with smart ideas. There are some lessons I think we can learn from the global financial crisis in 2008, when UK universities invested heavily in education for entrepreneurship, in helping universities to start businesses or create their own jobs where they couldn't secure them in the way that they might have imagined. But then perhaps ending on a positive note, and again, others have picked this up, we've done things we didn't think were possible. And the transformation in digital delivery of education is something that we should make sure we continue to foster. I think that for me, one of the troubling factors of working in international education is, by and large, you are extending opportunities to people who are already advantaged. Those people who are able to travel internationally to study in the UK already are socially advantaged. In the UK, there is already a very well-established pattern of UK universities offering education overseas through transnational provision. What I hope will turn out to be a transformation in digital delivery of high quality education really should create an opportunity for us to extend high quality opportunities on a much broader basis. But as you know, Furkan, and this is my final point, that does involve governments right around the world getting in line and changing legal frameworks to recognize online education. And that will be one of the things that we'll be working on internationally in the next period. I better stop there.
Thank you very much, Vivian. What is the general sense? Do you, Joe member universities, and do you see students returning back to campuses by September?
Yeah, I mean, we know that most universities are planning some face-to-face education. It will be made easier by the government's decision to reduce our social distancing rules from 2 meters to 1 meter. It won't be everything. I think some settings are quite difficult to manage in that way. But certainly focusing on things like small group teaching and access to specialist facilities, and then as much as you can manage safely within the 1 meter social distancing rules.
Great. Sanjay, are you online?
Yes, we're running a little short on time, so we should probably start doing Q&A.
Unless you have question, I was keeping track of questions which people were putting up at the Q&A. And I could also see Francisco is very good in doing multitasking. So he has responded many questions on digital device, impact, implications. I think the questions are broadly 2, 3, and I think one set of question is about the limits of the technology and about the limitations in the access of technology and the digital divide. I think that has already been answered in the presentation by all the 3 speakers. There is one set of questions where a student had asked is that even though online education is being popularized, but there are issues with regard to their credibility, and linking this online education with the expectation of the industry. So this is one set of questions if the panelists could quickly respond to. The second question, which I find is very, very interesting, they say that, do you think that this digital education shall have implication and impact on evolution? And cited examples of the printing press, and we all know that the printing had made priest somewhat less important than before. So do you think that perhaps it will make the ivory towers less important and the knowledge being so digital? And I think the other implication of this case is that since the digital has no limits of number, so why all countries should have so many universities? A few universities can do all teaching. So do you see that kind of things? And lastly, the third question that I have been concerned more, that do we sincerely believe that this online teaching and remote teaching learning, we have been able to do justice with our teaching and learning, or has there been loss of learning? Many people have these questions. So maybe if each one of you could take one question and could answer maybe in a minute each, we should be able to meet the deadline of the session. So
I can start by just reacting to a few of those things rather than responding directly, which unfortunately there is no time. But I'd like to mention several things. One is that, something that, the crisis has already let us know very clearly is that teachers, human teachers, are more needed than ever. I think that is very important because before the crisis, there were many voices telling that because the artificial intelligence and many more things, that eventually someday even teachers will be replaced by machines. Well, now we learned that that is not the case. We realize very clearly that teachers are more needed than ever. And I think that is an important reassurance of the important role that teachers have and will have to play in the future as we are sort of addressing these new realities. Now, the second thing is that for sure, digital teaching as it has been seen today was just a short-term a solution, if you want, but it shouldn't be considered as the permanent solution, because I think that will be and that will be very, I might say, sort of incomplete perspective. Now, the crisis, there are significant lessons learned from the crisis. One is that, first of all, we were not prepared to deal with this. Second, that the operational environment of our higher education is very fragile. The third is, as I mentioned before, online education might be easier to implement if we consider that it is just transferring contents to a teaching through Zoom, but it is not the panacea, is not the solution. For instance, we have learned that, what somebody was referring to, that, lecturing is the best way to teach, but the worst way to learn. So we have learned that the time for exposition, the time for lecturing should be reduced. And, there are even some experts saying that it should reduce to only 20 minutes. So also we have learned that we need another type of leadership in a crisis in our higher education institutions, in the classroom, in the higher education systems. And again, as I mentioned before, that there are many assumptions, some of those are related to the questions that are being asked today, that should be challenged today. One of them has to do with the fact that if online education is kind of a second-class education. So I think we have learned that that is not the case, that can be very good quality online education if we properly develop that. It is not, again, as I mentioned before, from face-to-face to remote, but from face-to-face to virtual. It is changing from a regular, classroom to the flipped learning classroom. It is not changing from a teacher in front of the students, now in front of the computer, but is much more about using the Socratic model of learning, using digital pedagogies. It is about making the learning of the students more engaging, more interesting, and of course, using as much as possible those tools in order not to substitute, but to complement good education.
Thank you, Francisco. I wish we had more time. Vivian, in a minute?
Well, just in a minute, I think we don't know enough about how what the variation in sort of digital methodology has produced in terms of the experiences of students. And I think there will be a very interesting piece of work that needs to be done probably in every country, looking at what was achieved and the impact it has on the way that students progress and their educational outcomes. I think it'll be very important to look back at that. On the other point you mentioned, we also need the regulators and legislators to catch up, because learning partially online is now, I think, going to be absolutely normal. And there is still a suspicion in many systems towards online learning, an assumption that it is necessarily lower quality. And I think the regulatory environment needs to catch up. So if you are simply posting static lectures online and expecting that to count as a kind of high quality education, that surely cannot do. But regulators have to come up with a more sophisticated way of recognizing high quality education. And then finally, just to support what Francisco said, when I talk to universities about what they're doing, it seems to me that there are real advantages to being able to teach in this way. You can still get group discussion going. You can encourage people who are a bit shy to contribute in a way that maybe they didn't when they were sitting in a room surrounded by their peers. So there are advantages, and we need to make the most of those, and perhaps get rid of those things that weren't that effective in the first place.
Thank you, Vivian. Joanna?
Yes, well, I agree with both. Sorry, I agree with what's been said, but I think there is some evolution going on. Just like the office space will never be the same again, neither will the classroom or the university. But that doesn't mean that the physical isn't important. It's incredibly important for socializing and for all sorts of other reasons. So I think a blended approach is going to happen. And what's been really interesting has been that everyone's had to get online. And as Vivian said, some people's experience of that, either in a classroom or university, has been really excellent. And some have, and quite a few haven't for many reasons. But we're learning, and universities do collaborate and they do talk to each other. And actually we can take the best of what we've learned from COVID. And we're moving away from the era where we were talking about MOOCs taking on the world. And MOOCs in some ways were a very colonial model of big brands providing sort of access to their education. And we're moving into a much more interesting space where you can have co-creation of content that actually can be shared and can be used in areas where there is real issues around access to good quality education. So I think that the future in terms of that we are evolving in how we're using digital spaces, but it's a good evolution.
Thank you very much, Joanna. So Sanjay, we are starting the session almost on time. We had started a minute late or two. I'll just say that this has indeed been really a very, very useful session, at least for me, a very learning session. And I thank each one of you, Francisco, Vera, Vivian, and Joanna, for agreeing to our request so readily and being with us. I think the UNDP advertisement says that this coronavirus crisis doesn't discriminate. Yet, it does discriminate, and the poor would suffer the most. So I think this is one lesson that we should keep in mind. And this suffering is not only in health terms, but also in education terms. I'll go by the UNESCO framework, which says that follow a policy where no student is left behind. So you take all of them. So address the issue of the digital divide. Also, the framework that they are providing is continue remote, because this is only possible, feasible, what you can do under the current situation. But as soon as you can and the circumstances permit, revert back to in-person learning, but then explore possibility of blending the digital with the personal learning. And I would like to add to this is that no compromise on quality at any cost. And one point, and I think each one of you made in your own way, is that perhaps the reality is not yet dawning upon us in higher education, but universities are likely to face severe financial cost. And I think that the national government should be ready to support universities in this time so that they continue to exist with quality and with commitment. Thank you, each one of you, and thank you very much. It was a pleasure being with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
Over to
Kamar.
you, Sanjay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It has been a real pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, speakers. It was a really insightful panel discussion. Thank you, participants, for sharing your questions and asking us some very important and pertinent questions. On this note, I'm going to move to our upcoming keynote address. We have a keynote address currently being delivered on enhancing student learning online by Professor Srikant Datar, Senior Associate Dean, University Affairs, Harvard Business School. This session is being moderated by Ashish Dhawan, the founder and chairman of the Board of Trustees at Ashoka University. In case you're interested in attending this session, please click on the link that is being provided on the chat right now. This link will take you to the track 1 of the conference where this keynote address is currently underway. We will begin our next session under track 2 at 6:20. This session will be on creating health promoting universities. See you soon. Thank you everyone for attending our previous panel discussion. Like we mentioned, we have a keynote that's currently underway. This keynote is on enhancing student learning online by Professor Srikant Datar, who's the Senior Associate Dean, University Affairs at Harvard Business School. It's a really exciting session being moderated by Ashish Dhawan, founder and chairman of the Board of Trustees at Ashoka University. In case you're interested in attending this session, please click on the link that is being provided to you in the chat box. This link will take you to the track 1 of the conference, and we will begin our next panel discussion as a part of track 2 at 6:20. See you soon.
और अनम्यूट भी वही अनम्यूट
Good evening, everyone. My name is Sanjay. I'm the host for this session. We will begin our panel discussion shortly in a couple of minutes.
Hello. Tamna tenang
Welcome to all the panelists. I'm Sanjay from the Harappa Education team. We will begin the session in a couple of minutes. Meanwhile, if I could request all of you to keep your mics and webcams switched off. Thank you.
Sanjay, a question.
Sure, sir.
So,
yes.
I'm Dr. Rajiv. Good evening.
Good evening, sir. We are live right now. We are broadcasting to everyone.
Okay, so you muted us, which is fine, but the video is also off because we can't see ourselves. So, if the video is also off?
Yes, we will begin the session in a couple of minutes. Till then, we are keeping all the microphones and webcams switched off.
Okay, fine. So, we'll just wait, stand by.
Yes, just a couple of minutes.
No issues.
Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. Quick reminder, we are in the Republic of Letters, a virtual conference for higher education leaders in India. We are in the track 2 of the Republic of Letters, the Resilient Institution. Here, our speakers will address the main administrative challenges that have been plaguing our higher education institution leaders ever since the COVID pandemic has hit us. Before we begin the next session on track 2, I'd like to inform you about the parallel discussions that are happening right now. On track 1, which is on transitioning to digital, we have a session towards student centricity, policies and practices in the making. In case you're interested in attending this session, please click on the link that has been provided to you in the chat box. That link will lead you to track 1, where this session is happening. We also have another session in track 3, which is an invite-only exclusive session for leading from the front. We have a session on prudent planning, sustainable financing for higher educational institutions. In case you're interested in attending the track 3 session, please click on the link that is being provided to you in the chat box. You can use this link to access the track 3 session. You may be required to put in your password, which has been shared with you on an email and WhatsApp. Without much ado, let me begin with the session. Our upcoming panel discussion is on creating health promoting universities. This session is being chaired by Dr. Pankaj Mittal. Dr. Mittal is the current Secretary General of Association of Indian Universities. She is also the first Vice Chancellor of Bhagat Phool Singh Mahila Vishwavidyalaya, the first rural women university of North India. She has also been a recipient of the Fulbright Nehru Scholarship Grant, as well as a President of India Award. She has a PhD in Agricultural Studies from the Indian Agricultural Research Institute. Our other panelist for today is Dr. Rajiv Yeravdekar. He is currently the Dean, Faculty of Health Sciences, Symbiosis International University. He's also a member of MCI, Central Supervisory Board, Maharashtra Medical Council, Maharashtra Nursing Council. He is a gold medal awardee for his MD, and he holds a PhD from Faculty of Management, Pune University. Last but not the least, we have Dr. Payden with us. She's the Deputy Representative to India, World Health Organization. She has over 23 years of experience in public health and holds a master's degree in sanitary health as well as public health. Just a couple of instructions. Please note that this session will run for 30 minutes. The panel will take questions from the audience towards the end of the session. We encourage you to share questions with us using the Q&A feature on Zoom. Over to you, Dr. Mittal.
Thank you, Sanjay. Thanks for the nice introduction of myself and all the panelists. And thanks to Ashoka University and the Harappa Education for organizing this mega event, which is really, really going very well. So the today's session is on promoting health, health promoting universities, how to create health promoting universities. Now, when you talk of India, we always boast of the demographic dividend we have with us, the type of young population we have. We say that India is the youngest population, and 65% of the people are below the age of 35 years. Now, this young population, how do we want this young population, sick population or the healthy population? Obviously, the healthy population. So when we talk of healthy population, so from where the health promotion starts, obviously from schools, but since we are dealing with the higher education, we'll be talking of the higher education, how the health promoting universities can be created, because when a student enters the higher education scenario and he is coming from a protected environment to an unprotected environment where he is facing a lot of anxieties and many issues are there which the person is facing, and that is an impressionable age when most of the vices are acquired. For example, if you talk of smoking, about 90% of the people start smoking at the age of 18 or before that. When you talk of drinking, around 10% of the students or 10% of people in the age group of 18 to 19 are drinking some sort of liquor. 10% of the people in this age group are diabetic. And slowly, India is becoming the depression capital of the world, because the number of depression people are having is increasing, and the especially in the school, the universities and colleges, the issues of drugs, alcohol, smoking, depression, anxiety, they are increasing too much. So the issue is how to ensure that our universities are health promoting universities, how to ensure that our universities are promoting healthy citizens. So for this, we are having this session. We have very two eminent, distinguished panelists with us. We have Dr. Payden, who is the Deputy Representative of WHO India, and we have Dr. Rajiv Yeravdekar. He is the Dean Health Sciences and Symbiosis International. So first question I would like to make to Dr. Payden. Dr. Payden, as far as I know, WHO is using something called a settings-based approach for promoting the concept of health. Can we know from you what is the setting-based approach? Dr. Payden, please.
Is it on? Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Pankaj Mittal, for the nice introduction to the session. And good afternoon to both you and Dr. Rajiv Yeravdekar, Dean Symbiosis University. Very good evening to you. Thank you very much to the organizers for bringing WHO on board to discuss such a very important topic, which is health promoting universities. Now, as you all know, health promotion is critical for health and well-being. It is a process that not only enables people to improve their health, but also increase their control over their own health, mind and body. Health promotion focuses on a wide range of social and environmental interventions, which goes beyond treatment and cure, but it mainly dwells on the root causes of ill health. The healthy setting or settings-based approach to health promotion involves a holistic and multidisciplinary method. It uses a whole system approach for disease prevention. Examples of settings include educational institutions, schools, work sites, hospitals, villages, and cities. During the first WHO Global Conference on Health Promotion, which was held in 1986, the Ottawa Charter for Health Promotion was laid out. Thereafter, 9 WHO conferences on health promotion have been held, which have taken landmark decisions. Now, to improve overall quality of life, health promotion continues to remain as a very useful and dynamic method as it integrates risk factors to address disease prevention. Now, the 4 principles of healthy settings approach are: number 1, to generate awareness of the linkages between health and the environment. Environment in the sense of the place where students or people live. So in case of health, in case of universities, it is the educational institutions as the environment in which youth and young people live and survive. And secondly, the healthy settings approach also improves on the setting environment, including changes to the physical environment or to the organization's structure, administration, and management. It also facilitates institutionalizing or inclusion of best practices. And finally, to inculcate participatory approach. For example, health and education officials, teachers unions, students, parents, health providers, and community leaders are brought together in a participatory manner to improve their health. There are very close linkages between education and health. Healthy educational settings is important to prevent health risks among youth and staff. Education and health are human rights, as you all know. They both play a critical role for human and economic development, basically enhancing people's capacity to have decent and productive lives. Now, United Nations has passed key resolutions to ensure universal access to health and education. And I'm sure you all would have seen those resolutions. Now, considerable number of youth and young people are in the educational institutions. And generally, this group of people are exposed to harmful products such as tobacco, alcohol, and drugs, as you heard from Dr. Pankaj. They also face greater risks of violence, including homicide. and road traffic injuries. This group of people can also experience devastating mental health, depression, anxiety, self-harm, substance abuse, addiction to video games, eating disorders, and suicide. And especially during the COVID times, young people and also others would be faced with a lot of mental health issues. And we are seeing that happening in many places. Now, universities, colleges, and schools have multiple opportunities to create a learning environment and organizational culture to enhance health, well-being, and also enable students, staff, visitors to achieve their full potential. The Millennium Development Goals and Sustainable Development Goals have emphasized the links between education and health for human development, but very limited efforts have been made in this direction. So we do not, there are very good policies at the global level, but we see very limited efforts being made in operationalizing them at the lower levels in various.
I have a feeling that Dr. Payden's internet connection has conked off, Dr. Mittal.
Okay.
Institutions.
Okay.
Yeah, so the investment on youth will not only result in healthy and empowered adults, but it will also result in healthier futures. And that is it from my side.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Payden. Very well said. And the relationship between health and the impact on the higher educational institutions, very well said. And for some of you who may not be knowing, health and happiness are very much connected. And Dr. Payden happens to be from Bhutan, who lays a lot of importance on happiness. Gross National Happiness Index is measured there. So thank you, Dr. Payden. Now we move on to Dr. Rajiv Yeravdekar. And he has been doing a lot of work in promoting health in the universities, rather for creating health promoting universities. And when I was in UGC, we were working on a sort of a concept paper on creating health promoting universities, in which Dr. Rajiv was doing a lot of work. And AIU also, we are trying to take it up. Dr. Rajiv, I would like to know from you that this settings-based approach, which was told by Dr. Payden, how do we implement in the higher education institutions? And then, because in Symbiosis, you are promoting health in a big way. So how are you promoting health using the setting-based approach in your institution? Over to Dr. Rajiv.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Dr. Mittal. Good evening, Ms. Payden and other esteemed members. First of all, I would like to congratulate the organizers for organizing this session, this topic in this very important track, because this track talks about creating and sustaining resilient institutions. And I'm glad and pleasantly surprised that health is taken as one of the parameters of resilience. Whether it's COVID or not, given the dismal contribution of the Indian public healthcare system, we have now realized that health is not a dispensable commodity. And we need to invest in public health to reap the fruits in future, or even for that matter, in the current times. And I'm delighted with this stance taken by the organizers to sensitize the echelons of higher education on the importance to be given to health and health promoting initiatives. This is especially relevant to a country which is classified typically as a developing economy in the LMIC, or the low and middle income countries group. And with India talking so much and so much being hyped about the demographic dividend, which Dr. Pankaj rightly emphasized, if we are to encash on this demographic dividend, and given the fact of so many facts and figures she mentioned about the health parameters which go for a toss during the sojourn of the students at universities, if we are to prevent the demographic dividend from getting converted into a demographic disaster, it's time opportune, in fact, late, if we don't start investing in students' health or investing in health promotion right at the university level, because as she rightly mentioned, this is a transition time. Individuals enter the university system as late adolescents. And as someone rightly said, an adolescent is the most confused individual. Neither is he or she considered a young child, nor is he an adult in the true sense. So this lot of students, this population cohort is a confused lot, and having moved from the safety confines of their home, their parental guidance, and coming under the influence of what is popularly known as peer pressure, forget the media pressure and the social media pressure specifically, they are an exposed and vulnerable lot. Erroneously, they are thought to be healthy, but statistics worldwide show that students are a vulnerable and easy prey, a soft target to the seeds of various non-communicable diseases which are sown at this transition time. So it's very important that higher educational institutions, especially of the stature of a university, realize the importance of health promotion at this stage and age of the student's life, and initiate processes of implementing a health promoting university in its entirety. And there are two key words which I would pick up from Ms. Payden's talk. One is of institutionalizing it, and second one is participatory management. I'll elaborate on that in a few minutes. When we say institutionalizing, it means getting it into the mission statement of the university. It means getting it integrated into the process and the spirit of the functioning of the university. It means that it is implemented, reflected in all the policies of the university. The university should eat, breathe, sleep, health promotion in all its activities. Whether it goes by the simple desk design, ergonomics, it goes by promoting a healthy lifestyle, by ensuring that the campuses are, you may not have a motorized vehicle, or you may have a no motorized vehicle policy. It means providing safe, wholesome food, which is tasty, and at the same time, there's a clear color-coded bar to show which foods are obesogenic and high in salt and saturated fats. It means providing clean, portable drinking water. It means promoting health in the academics of the university. So there could be electives in health promotion. It could mean accessibility, affordability, and availability of healthcare services to the staff and students and the community at large within an easy range. It's very normal for the university to cater to the staff and students because they're the first and most critical stakeholders of the university. But the university should have a mandate larger than its immediate stakeholders and extend to the community surrounding it, of which it is an integral part. So it is institutionalizing, means getting it into the DNA of the university. And that's exactly what we are doing at Symbiosis International University. Whether it's preventive healthcare services, whether it's promotive healthcare services, whether it is curative healthcare services. Everywhere, health is the first and foremost agenda in any initiative which the university undertakes. The second part is of participatory management. You cannot drag or you cannot push someone into health promotion. It has to be a multi-stakeholder participation. So there has to be an engagement with all opinion leaders and who are the possible beneficiaries of this initiative. So as Dr. Mark Doris, who is considered as the father of health promoting universities, he's a UK-based professor at the University of Central Lancashire. And he is very nicely mentioned in one of his seminal reports, whether it should be a top-down approach or whether it's a bottoms-up approach. I would say the best part is it has to be a drip approach. Contribution both from top-down, leading from the front, leading from the management, and acceptance by the students. Because tomorrow, if you start making something compulsory, the students would retaliate. They need a voice. Today's student is an intelligent student. He's well-read. He knows the pros and cons. So unlike what was possible in the yesteryears where we could say this is the rule, they would point it out that this is no longer the rule. And if we try to endorse it, they would reflect to the off-quoted terminology of a generation gap, which is not applicable and accepted by today's citizens. So it has to be a multi-pronged, strategy-driven, result-oriented approach. And this is exactly what we are doing at Symbiosis. All the initiatives are monitored. Their administration is supported by the top management. Funds are earmarked, allocated. There are special elective programs which the student can take in public health and health promotion. Students are marked for their attendance in the gym. Every campus of Symbiosis at all the 5 states where we are operational is provided with recreation and wellness facilities. And the recreation and wellness facilities focus not only in gym and bodybuilding, but on 3 key dimensions of building of strength, stamina, and suppleness. We've got a dedicated Symbiosis Center for Emotional Wellbeing to cater to the emotional and mental health problems of students, and these services are provided on campus. Unfortunately, in India, mental health is a stigma, and the approach that we have followed at the Symbiosis Center for Emotional Wellbeing is to destigmatize. Come, let's talk, open up. Demedicinalize. That means it is not the sole prerogative of doctors, least of all mental health professionals, to address mental health. It has to be a team approach. The student may have relationship problems, so common in university. The student may have adjustment problems, staying away from home for the first time. So it has to be beyond doctors, to include counselors, to include teachers, to include peers, and educationalize it, by which we encourage development of responsible global citizens who are the citizenry of the next generation.
Thank you, Dr. Rajiv. Very well said. You have very clearly indicated how the higher education institutions can promote the concept of health, and even the small things like the design of the chair, how the canteen is, all that impacts the health in the universities. Very well said. And many of the viewers would also be knowing that the one government body called FSSAI, which is Food Safety and Standards Authority of India, they have a concept called Eat Right Campus. Whether the campus is eating in the right manner, whether the canteens are hygienic, whether the type of food which is served there is healthy or not, are they serving junk food or not. So they give a certification of Eat Right campuses to the universities. So the universities, if they are listening to us, try to get that certificate of Eat Right campus, so that you are branded as a university which is practicing healthy food habits in the students. Now, after the initial two presentations of the two presenters, I will take up the questions. There is one question to Dr. Payden. Dr. Payden, they want to know, can you comment on the role of WHO in the light of global backlash and the political resistance? How is WHO pushing for international collaboration for health? Dr. Payden, please.
So I understand this is in relation to the COVID response. I would like to highlight on what WHO India is supporting in India, because that is what we are doing here at the global level. We have the headquarters who will respond to any issues that are raised at the global level. So in India, we are working very closely with the Ministry of Health, supporting the Ministry of Health in its response to COVID-19. We are participating in the joint monitoring groups, which advises the Ministry of Health in their response, reviewing all the responses which are being undertaken at the state level in India, in different states. We also monitor the cases and the deaths of COVID-19 in India, and offer all the support that is required in terms of testing, in terms of implementing containment measures, in terms of supporting research activities for COVID-19. So that is our work on COVID-19. And we also work with Ministry of Health India in many areas, such as important health programs like TB elimination. The Prime Minister has a very ambitious goal of eliminating TB by 2025, and WHO is helping wholeheartedly with our network of TB consultants who are stationed all over India in addressing TB detection, testing, diagnosis, and treatment. So we are supporting the Ministry of Health and state governments in that. We also have a huge program on routine immunization, vaccine preventable diseases, who are again a network of field staff are stationed all over India, and we are working very closely with the local government. In addition, we have other programs such as non-communicable diseases. We have HIV/AIDS program, we have reproductive maternal health program, etc. So we are working very closely with the government, and in India, we do not really, we are focusing on the work, especially in preventing deaths and saving lives from various diseases which are faced by the population. So this is what I would like to say. I would like to focus on the positives and the work relationships that we have with the government. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Payden. Especially after COVID, the importance of WHO and the health promotion is very, very important. All the universities have to see that the hygiene is maintained, good hygiene habits are inculcated, especially post-COVID. Now, Dr. Rajiv, people are listening to you very, very attentively. So here's a question for you. There are two questions, in fact. So I'll club both of you before the paucity of time. One says that Dr. Rajiv, in the beginning, you mentioned that students are utterly confused, but later you mentioned that they are very intelligent. So what do you feel? I mean, they are intelligent or confused. So how do we deal with them? And second is, how can the universities be alert and vigilant regarding attempted suicides, especially now when the learning is taking place online? Because it's an online world, there is no counseling given to the students. They are not able to talk to their friends or teachers. So they are feeling a bit aloof. They are feeling a bit secluded. So in these times, how do you suggest that how can you counsel the students, or how can you prevent them from taking these steps like suicide or something? Over to Dr. Rajiv.
Yeah, thank you for combining the two questions because they are interrelated, and in no way did I intend to confuse the audience. Well, the students are well read, they are internet savvy, they're netizens. But the problem comes is that net information may not be an authentic information and medically validated all the time, number one. Number two is, much as they would be well read by the information which they solicit from different portals and different sites, there is something called as peer pressure. For example, all the net sites would say that alcohol is bad and injurious to your health. Obviously, right. But then there is some peer who says, in moderate quantities, consumption of alcohol is good. And the WHO site says red wine is good for the heart, health of the heart. So why don't you consume red wine? And then this guy who wants to take red wine, probably, who was probably deterred because he read on the net, gets influenced by the fact about the friend quoting that red wine is good for the health of the heart. He does not quote what is mentioned by WHO below, that this does not mean that the WHO recommends that you start consuming red wine for betterment of your for your health. It is best to abstain from consumption of red wine. But this is distorted information is what confuses the citizen of today. That's what I meant. Coming to the question of prevention of suicides, as you rightly quoted, madam, India has emerged is predicted to emerge as the depression capital of the world. India had the largest number of teenage suicides in 2017. And there are a host of such depressing facts and figures pertaining to mental health. The Indian ecosystem is unique as regards, is probably not unique as regards mental health. One is there is stigma attached to mental health. And I often quote this example. If one happens to fracture a limb, he gets everyone's sympathy. Oh, this fellow met with a road traffic accident, he has fractured his limb. But the moment this gentleman or this lady or this student goes to a counselor or anything for mental health, he is immediately shunned, abused, in a way mentally outside from the society, that, oh, he is the one who has resorted to seeking the help of a counselor. So this stigma attached to mental health is one of the biggest blocks, barriers of mental health being addressed adequately. The second thing is the dearth of qualified, trained mental health professionals. The third thing is the approach of the medical fraternity to medicinalize mental health problems. As I said, this is exactly what the doctors unfortunately consider it as a problem which can be addressed only by the doctors. No, it requires a team approach. And as is rightly taught to all of us medicos, the first unit of community is the family. So the family is the all-important unit in which the individual starts getting these mental health problems and is the first point of contact where ideally the person who is potentially going to be a mental health patient should refer to. The fourth disadvantage or the approach to tackling these mental health problems is a long drawn out treatments, and there has to be a continuous monitoring, like some like tuberculosis or leprosy, etc. And many times than not, the student loses the client. I would not even say the patient. The client loses interest or drops out, and that leads to non-compliance with disastrous consequences. At Symbiosis, we've tried to address all these problems from the perspective of a higher educational institute. We've set up these campus services on campus. We are probably amongst the few universities in the country to set up a dedicated center for emotional well-being on campus, which provides 24/7 counselor services to staff, students, and irrespective of their problems, academic, administrative, financial, relationship, so on and so forth, my counselors on each of the campus are flooded with inquiries. Second thing, we have a team-based approach where we interact with the academicians, we talk with the parents, we talk with the peers. Third thing is we pick up the early signs and symptoms of a person who is likely to become a mental patient, in the sense that a decline in the performance, a lackadaisical approach, indrawing, inability to talk, the telltale signs by which we can predict. And even in a conducive environment for mental health, such as the student failing an exam, these students are given special attention both by the counselors. The academic teacher is told to look at this student sympathetically. Parents are told to address the situation and counsel the child. Do not compare your child with a sibling or with his colleagues. There's a multi-pronged approach, and there's a continuous monitoring, and the student is never felt alone. The simple breathe line, or the tagline which we tell all the students: let's talk. Keep on opening up. Keep up the channels of communication open. You are not alone. There are others also who may be having similar problems. It is not something trendy or fashionable not to go to a counselor. Going to counselor is not to be stigmatized. And we've got good results in the last 1 year that we've been operational. We've got a qualified psychiatrist who's trained in Australia in adolescent psychiatry, and she's doing a fantastic job with the counselors, thanks to the support given by the management.
Thank you, Dr. Rajiv. Thank you. That was an elaborate reply. And there are many, many more questions, but time constraint is there and we have to close this session. So sorry for the rest of the questions. If you want, you can write it directly to the panelists and they can send a reply to you. So thanks to both the panelists, Dr. Rajiv, Dr. Payden, for attending this session. And thanks to Sanjay. Over to you.
Thank you, madam. Please feel free to share our email IDs. We are happy to answer the questions on email.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mittal. Thank you, speakers. This was indeed an insightful conversation. I feel like mental health is such a big taboo, even within student communities, not just within administrative communities. So it's very insightful to hear how universities across the country may be encouraged to take up the issue of mental health as much as they take up the issues of physical health. Thank you so much. And thank you, audience, for sharing questions. Unfortunately, we weren't able to take too many. We hope you're able to reach out to the panelists and ask them any questions you have.
Most welcome. Thank you so much.
Thanks to Dr. Rajiv, Dr. Payden, and Sanjay, and thanks to all the participants who have attended this session. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. Thank you. Thanks, Sandeep. Sanjay.
No worries. Thank you, sir. I'm quickly going to redirect everyone's attention to an upcoming keynote address that we have right now. We have a session on higher education in a moment of social transformation by Dr. Pardis Madhavi. She's the Dean, Social Sciences, and Director, School of Social Transformation at Arizona State University. This session is being moderated by Shreyasi Singh, who is the founder and CEO of Harappa Education. In case you're interested in attending the session, please click on the link that has been provided to you in the chat box. This link will take you to track 1, where the keynote address will start at 7 sharp. I'll also take a moment to share the lineup for tomorrow that we have in store. We have really exciting sessions by Dr. Anil Sahasrabuddhe, Chairman of AICTE, on Technical Education Reimagined. We have another session by Professor Bharat Anand, who's the Vice Provost, Advances in Learning at Harvard University on retooling Harvard. And we have Mr. Ben Nielsen, who's the CEO of Minerva Project, who's going to talk to us about reimagining the university. Thank you so much. We hope you had a great session. We look forward to seeing you in the keynote address.